Hello, and today essentially what I want to do is I want to have a look at political constitutions versus legal constitution in respect of same-sex marriages. So before we begin, let's have a quick summary of what is a political constitution and what is a legal constitution. Well, in a political constitution, Parliament is sovereign, and so you don't have any recognized rights. All you have is the civil liberties that Parliament chooses to protect because they're sovereign, they make the decisions, and that's about it. In a legal constitution, you have the judiciary who is making checks and balances to the government as opposed to the legislature doing that, and so they have more power, but they're not sovereign as Parliament is within a political constitution. So that's essentially what we are, and what we want to do in this video is we want to have a look at them and explain how we can see them working in reality by looking at same-sex marriages in South Africa and in the UK. So what essentially happened in South Africa is you have the Fourie case, and what happened in this case is that it was brought against the state that these two women should be allowed to get married, and it was a violation of their right to equality and dignity as set out, I think, in Section 9 of the South African Constitution. And essentially what happened is the 9 judges, they responded to the different arguments. I have the notes somewhere here, but I don't think it's important. And at the end of that, they ruled out by saying that the ban on same-sex marriages is unconstitutional. As a result, Parliament was then given a year to correct this by adding words like spouse, not just wife and husband, to the Marriage Act, and so on. And that's how same-sex marriage became legal in South Africa. Now you can see this is a very judiciary focused process of getting to the end of the aim to encourage equality within, which is what the Constitution of South Africa says. And from this respect, you can see how it's a legal constitution because it's a judiciary that's placing checks and balances on the executive, the government. Now, let's compare this to the UK. So in the UK, historically, same-sex marriage cases, actually they tended to come through the form of transsexuality cases, and these are always held to be void. This was then put into statute with the Nullity of Marriage Act in 1971, followed by the Matrimonial Causes Act 1973. This all changed in 2004 when we had the Civil Partnerships Act, which made the civil union partnerships, they basically, this relationship of a civil union gave the same rights and responsibilities as marriage, but here the government made it very, very clear that this is not the same as marriage, and there is a distinction. You cannot call this a marriage. Now, what happened is in 2006 we have the case of Wilkinson and Kitsinger and others. Now, this was a lesbian couple in Canada who were married, but they came to the UK and they couldn't get the same status. So with the help of Liberty, they brought claims against that this was a violation of their rights, and the courts were to do something about this. Now, in this case, it wasn't like the South African case, which was, a great win and a great advancement in society. What happened is the judge agreed that homosexual couples are treated differently to heterosexual couples, and this is discrimination. If you're treated differently, then, by nature of it, it's discrimination. But he said that this discrimination was justified. The courts were bound by it because the acts were there to preserve the traditional definition of marriage between one man and one woman, primarily to produce children. Now, what's interesting is these same arguments were the ones argued by counsel for the state in South Africa, and Albie Sachs, if you listen to his lecture on the University of Chicago's website, he goes through the arguments and that were brought on behalf of the state and why they basically a load of nonsense and they were ruled out. So you can have a look at that if you like, but let me go back to what I was saying. So essentially I feel like the High Court, they wanted to do something about it because that's why they recognized that there was discrimination, but ultimately because, you know, Parliament is sovereign and they're bound by the fact that they can only have a civil union, they can't have a marriage. This was made very clear by the executive. So same-sex marriage also is legal now in the UK, but this came through a different means. It wasn't any case, because as we can see from the 2006 case, the case obviously failed. It was brought through the coalition, who brought in a statute, the Marriage Same-Sex Couples Act 2013. So you can see the process is lots more to do with legislature and basically the lawmaking capacity, you know, of Parliament, placing checks and balances on the government, as opposed to the judiciary, as we saw in South Africa. Now, both have their bonuses, and both have their disadvantages, but an interesting point to ponder before ending this video, because I realize it's getting a bit long, is would Parliament have passed the Act without the pioneering judgments in other countries, such as South Africa? Obviously, this is something we're never going to know the answer to, because it's to do with time, that it's already happened, and the way things have worked out, we can't test the answer. But I would say that it's played an important role, because being in the globalized world that we are in, especially when you look in terms of public law, there's a lot of pressure from other countries, especially when they're like or the Commonwealth countries, and you're tied to them by a common law legal system. It places even more of an importance, and I think when you have so many influencing factors, again, this starts to undermine the principle of parliamentary sovereignty, because it's like, well, actually, you're just influenced by X, Y, Z. How sovereign are you in your decision making? So that's an interesting perspective to think of. Anyway, I just hope you found this video interesting.